Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction earlier, Jonathan. I was thinking as you were talking, it's like that guy sounds like he needs to actually figure out what he wants to do with his life. Um, actually decide one career and stick with it. So, just to make a little apology up front, this is not a Mother's Day sermon, and I wasn't asked to do one. I've made that mistake before, to get up on a Mother's Day and not have a Mother's Day sermon ready, but that's not what happens here. Okay, so if you say at the end of this, that wasn't about Mother's Day, I knew that, okay? This was not oops, got the wrong Sunday. So this was planned, or at least that's what they're telling me. It could be a big setup now, I don't know. Some of you have already known that Jennifer's here. She does exist, she is alive. I am still married to her, so some people find all of those things quite impressive at times. Mostly the last one, that I'm still married, but we're down here enjoying some of the lovely weather in the Bay of Plenty. Anyone that knows me knows that a couple of things I like is to read and to understand how things work. And I love making connections. I love finding out why things work that way, or why things are just so. So I especially enjoy when I find out how certain things have come about because of an accident or a mistake, or someone said the wrong thing, or what was once done by accident is now a tradition that now becomes a rule or a law. And so I love digging into history, and I love finding out how things connect. I was just reading about something the other night, and we see it almost every time we watch a movie. If we watch the titles, at the end of it there'll be a little note there about everything in this movie is fictitious, and any variance to a true character is unintentional, something like that. That came about because there was a movie in the 1930s about some Russian history, and a Russian prince didn't like the way he was portrayed in it, and he sued the movie companies for libel and won a lot of money. And so from now on, every time they make a movie, at the end of it, they put that phrase because of the big payout they made in the 1930s to this guy when they deframed his character. So we watch that every time when we fast forward the movies, or when we're walking out, hoping for another little clip at the end that's there. And what I especially find interesting is the way in which we find out about family law, L-O-R-E, and custom. So inside our families and inside each of our networks, we do things in certain ways. There are certain habits we have. Maybe there are phrases. Perhaps there are attributes. Sometimes it's our looks. Sometimes it's the way we stand or operate. We have ways in which we do things. And I love finding out where they've come from. A number of years ago, this is my first slide, one of our authors, Michael King, the late Michael King, historian, wrote a book called At the Edge of Memory, A Family Story. And this story was about his great uncle on his wife's side. And great uncle Morris was a little odd. There's some little things about him that were a little bit different, and they couldn't quite pin it down. And so through some conversations and through some other little bits and pieces, Michael King tracked down the true history of this man. So on the surface, he presented as someone who came to New Zealand in 1908 and presented himself as an Irish-speaking Scotch Presbyterian who became Catholic to marry this woman. Hence the accent and some other bits and pieces. Now, the long story short is it came out that he was actually from Ukraine and was Jewish, and sometime in this life he had become an Irish-Scotch person to start a new life in New Zealand. And just changed his name, changed his background, changed his identity, and just reinvented himself completely. And there were some little incidents in the family, and if you read the book, he tracks it all down, and it's fascinating. And he's pulling together little threads of a story from around the world. He got to go and do some research in different countries, and digs into different things that were happening in Central Europe during some of the great pogroms there, the fleeing to Europe and America and New Zealand of various Jewish communities, and how some of them reinvented themselves. And so sometimes little phrases that came out, that's not Scott, that's not Irish, where's that from? Or there's a story in the book about him crying when some of the atrocities during World War II with the Holocaust were coming out, and he was realizing these were his people that had been destroyed in the Holocaust. And the book, At the Edge of Memory, I really like it because it's those family stories we have that are at the edge of our memories as a family. Maybe we've got a thread or two of them. We don't have the whole story. And maybe grandma tells you one thing and great uncle Bill tells you something slightly different, and you're trying to pull these threads together. They don't quite match, and there's something there. You know it's not quite the whole story yet, or maybe you don't understand why Grand Auntie Susan doesn't talk to Cousin Gerald, or whatever it is, right? There's hundreds of these stories, and you're like, oh, there was a scandal, there was a fight, oh, I think there was something about a horse. And you're like, okay, I don't understand any of this stuff that you're talking about. And these stories sit at the very edge of our memories, and as generations pass, that story fades, and it's lost to time. And some of them you can dig up because you can dig up records, or you can go to archives and find things, but by and large, as the generations click on, the story fades. The other photograph there is one of my great-grandfathers. And one of my aunts told me, oh yes, like every New Zealand family, and I'll come to this in a second, he fought at Gallipoli. Now, if you listen to every story you hear, there must have been several 100,000 New Zealanders at Gallipoli on Anzac Day. There were not. I just want to stress that. Or some of the people are talking about is the same dude from 10 different family generations. So I did some digging, and I found my great-grandfather's war record. I actually met this man when I was a little boy. He passed away in 1975, so I was 2 when he passed. So again, someone at the edge of my memory, and I could find his records. He was in the army. He's wearing his uniform there on Queen Street, just before he went off to Europe, where he was badly wounded on the Western Front. Didn't fight at Gallipoli, but fought in Germany, in the last great offensive into Germany in 1918, was badly wounded. Luckily for me, he survived, because my grandfather wasn't even a memory at that stage, if you get my drift, right? So if he hadn't come back, I wouldn't be standing here. So all of us have these little family stories. I remember my grandmother on my father's side talking to me about her grandmother that helped raise her when she was a little girl. And I looked up the archival records, and sure enough, there's the census for 1911 in Ireland, and there's a record of my grandmother's grandmother who was born in 1820. And I've got a couple of little wisps of stories from that. I wish I'd paid more attention to my grandmother now. You know, I think I probably wanted to, I don't know, do anything other than listen to my grandmother talk about her grandmother, right? As 9-year-olds do. All of us have these stories in our lives, fragments, pieces, memories, threads. In the Bible, we have a couple of things like this as well, some letters. They're the ones at the back, the little ones at the back, as I call them. And they're about the changing of the guard in Christianity. All right, so these letters are written by, there's a lot of arguments about who wrote them and when and all that sort of jazz, and if you want to get into the scholarly debate on that, I'm sure that's a great afternoon, and we can have some fun. But long and the short of it is, they're near the end of the 1st century, and they're writing letters to people that probably never met Jesus. Or they've met people who met Jesus. So we're starting to get to that generation now where it's like, I don't know Jesus, but I know a guy that knows a guy that met Jesus, and I'm going to tell you about him. And so we're starting to get moving from the oral to the written aspects of Christianity. We're moving away from, I'll tell you about the guy I met. I was at the Sermon on the Mount. I was at the crucifixion. I saw one of his miracles. I ate some of the bread. Or my dad was at the crucifixion. Or my mum was there when she ate that food. We're now starting to pass into the next generation of Christianity, where those who knew Jesus firsthand are almost all gone. We're at the very edge of memory now as we start to fade into this next generation. David's already mentioned the fact that we're standing here today and sitting here and singing songs about the text. So someone's obviously told somebody, and that's why we're here. Within our families sometimes those stories fade and they die and we don't remember them anymore. They're gone. And there's probably a natural piece for that. If we had to remember every story every one of our ancestors ever did, we might spend all day just reciting them and never actually get anything else done, or not make our own stories up. But We're at this point now where this changing of the guard's operating, these stories at the very edge of our memory, and they're writing to them. And we can argue about some of those technical stuff, but we've already read out Jude. There's 2nd and 3rd John are the other two letters I want to mention. If we flip over to the next slide, these three short letters, sort of think of them as about as an A4 piece of paper, basically, all right? Brief. I came up with this phrase a few years ago, and I think it's kind of become a bit of a credo for myself. I care a whole lot more about a whole lot less these days. And I think when you're reading these letters, you see people that are getting older, and a lot of stuff that might have been important to them when they were younger have just burnt off and faded away, and they're getting down to it real quick and real sharp. I got a bit of a passion for these shorter letters at the back of the Bible, as I call them, when I was doing my studies, because they're often neglected. We often don't read them. So if you go home today, and read 2nd and 3rd John, you can say you've read or listened to 3 books of the Bible in one day. All right? That'll take you all of 4 minutes. And if you say you don't have time to do that, I think you should stop scrolling on Instagram and devote 4 minutes to reading 2nd and 3rd John. All right? 200 and something words apiece. All right? Not a strenuous effort today. So people are coming near the end of their lives. They want to make sure what they're talking about is being passed on to the next generation. They don't want these stories to fade off the back, as all stories do. Right? They want to bring the edge of memory to the forefront. And they're thinking about what's important and what's not important. They're thinking about the things that matter and don't matter. So we're not going to read the other two. I thought about doing it, but I'm seeing food come out. And, I kind of know the realities of life, right? So, 2nd John, verse 5 is the part I want us to focus on. And we'll come back to this in a minute and do a little bit more work on it. We don't know who the dear lady is. There's again, debates about who she could be or whether it means the church, etc. It doesn't matter. We don't know. 245 words, okay? Verse 5, and now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new command, but one we have heard from the beginning. I ask that we love one another. I'm not writing to you something new. I'm recalling what we've already talked about. I'm bringing it forth. Okay, I'm bringing it from the edge to the center. 3rd John, Gaius, don't know who he is, some dude. All right, 219 words. Like, you could read this book 20 times today and still have another episode of your favorite TV show to watch. Verse 3, it gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. Jude, 461 words. Dear friends, I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share. He had to get on to some other topics. That's kind of Jude's thing. I want to write to you about this, but this has sort of come up and pressed into things. Love, faithfulness, and common salvation are the 3 themes that these 3 letters talk about. So we've got the Gospel of John, very long and lengthy gospel. We've got this very short little brief letter. 1 piece of paper. 3 big themes: love, faithfulness, common salvation. If you were writing a letter, your last letter to somebody, you had 250 words, what would you talk about? What junk would you drop off? What nonsense would you forget? What irrelevant topics would fade to the background? If you were thinking, this is the very last letter I will ever write to these people I care about, what would you say? Now, you might be writing to them as a parent, as a grandparent, as a loved one, as a friend, people in the faith. What would you pull it down to? What would just burn off to nonsenseness as you write your letter? How concise and brief would you be? We sometimes forget in our modern era, when we can text and write and send all sorts of communications relatively free and cheap, Letter writing was an expensive process in this period. All right? Actually, there's a quick... Who's actually had a letter in the mail in the last year? There's a few. Okay, nice. We don't do it as much as we do anymore, do we? You know, it's nice to get them. We all feel a little bit squishy when we get a nice letter in the mail. I probably need to write some more for my kids, actually. That's a good point. So I've learned something from today's sermon as well, so check. Okay, so you're writing a letter to a loved one. You want this to be important. You want this to say something. This might be the thing they read out at a funeral. Here's the last letter Grandpa wrote to me. Here's the very last thing my father ever sent to me, my mother, my sister, my cousin, my child. These are the words they wanted me to know about. 2 John, 3 John, and Jude are those words. And look at 2 John, I've got it up there again. Love one another. That's what he wants to get across in this last letter. Gospel of John is full of this term of love, real love, not fake love, not I love nachos, I love with that TV show, I love it when you do that. No, this is love, which is defined as I want the best for you as you. All right? So often when people talk about love, they're talking about trying to manipulate people or make them into the image of them. So when I love you as you, and I want the best for you, that's not me trying to get anything out of that. That's the sort of love 2 John's talking about. And we know that when a congregation doesn't have that sort of love, it's like pouring battery acid across it. Right? It's just destructive. When we don't operate within our personal lives with that sort of love, they're just a series of interactions that we're using other people for. So the writer of this letter is saying, I want you to love one another like we've talked about before, is what he's trying to get across in his letter. Right? This is not new. This is not a new idea I'm dropping into your mind. This is an old idea that we've gone over before. 3 John talks about faithfulness to the truth there in verse 3. Notice how he uses the idea that it's a journey. It's walking in the truth. It's not an academic, intellectual exercise. I've met people in my life who might have been academically, intellectually correct, but they were awful human beings. Awful human beings, but they were technically correct. That's not what we're talking about here. It doesn't matter if you don't just know the truth. You've got to walk in it. You've got to live it. And again, this letter to 3 John, a different community altogether, this is the words he wanted to get across to them. You've got to live in this truth. Walk this truth. Eat it every day. Allow it to imbibe what you're doing. And then Jude, my own favorite text, is talking about a common salvation. And then he talks about people getting sidetracked. And I love this idea that it's a common salvation. So one of the issues inside the letter of Jude is that there seems to be some people with like the inside scoop on Jesus. And they're letting everybody know that they've got the inside track. You know, my truth about Jesus. I've got the inside scoop and you need to come to me to get it. And the writer's going, no, it's common salvation. It belongs to all of us. It's something that everybody can be part of because of who Jesus was. And these 3 letters, again, they are bringing this the sense of memories to the forefront. They want the listeners, the readers of these letters, to know what's really important and not to get sidetracked into the silly issues. If we were to list our silly issues today, I wonder what we would say if one of these people were writing to us. What are the nonsense issues that we get sidetracked by? As a people, as an individual. There's lots of different ones we can get sucked into. The key thing I wanted to write to here about, though, is it's very clear that these 3 letters are written to somebody that they're in relationship with. Right? He's not saying, hey, you don't know me, but I want to talk to you about this. Oh, okay, thanks, dude. Ben. All right? There's a relationship here. There's already an established relationship between the sender of this letter and the receiver of this letter. Otherwise, it's just some crazy dude sending you something by email, right? I'm not going to be a Nigerian prince. I'm not going to make millions of dollars this week. I'm not going to do all the other scams that you get. Okay, they're not happening. I'm comfortable with that. So the challenge, the question I had as I was reading this is, what legacy are you building today? You might be coming near the end of your time on earth, or you might be at the very early stages of it, but you're building a legacy whether you know it or not. You're building something for those around you, whether you know it or not. I was recently at a funeral, and I used that famous quote, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. All right? Who knows who actually said it, but it still works. I like it. We're building a legacy. That's why these people could write to these congregations and tell them what was going on. You're building a legacy with your loved ones, the people at work, the people you encounter, the people on your street, your neighbors. You're building a legacy that allows you to speak to what you're doing. We don't just get to sort of turn up at the end and drop truth bombs down. All right? It's like, okay, well, thanks, crazy old man, for turning up and ranting for a bit. We'll put you over there and we'll give you your meds. Okay? There's got to be a relationship that you've cultivated and developed, and people have got to see it and believe it and know it's true, and they've talked to you about it. They've watched you do it. They know how you operate. Why are you different? What is about you that's different from all the other people I encounter? Why do you treat everybody kindly? Why do you love everybody, not just the people that you like or just the people that are easy to love? These are the challenges these legacies had. So John and Jude, they're drawing these memories from the edge and they're bringing them back front and center. And that's what they want to bless these people with as they depart their life. These characters, these authors, probably didn't live much longer after these letters were sent. And these were their final words. And they wanted to lay a challenge to every single person that to live a life that's worthy, to pass that legacy on to all that they encounter. And that the connection between the life lived, the words spoken, and the legacy are the same all the way across. So I challenge you on Mother's Day to think about how you're building a legacy. Obviously for mothers, that's often quite talked about on a day like today. And you're building that legacy every day. You're working on it. How might you communicate that in different ways? Thank you.